The story kicks off in the basement of a lab, where we find Dr. Carlos and the owner of a theme park struggling to carry a ridiculously heavy box. Weird sounds are coming from inside, like some kind of animal in pain, but they load it onto a truck anyway. The guy hands Carlos some cash and drives off with the mysterious cargo. The next day, Carlos heads over to the university to visit an old friend, Professor Kenny. He tells him he's close to finishing a major project, but he needs a bit of funding from the university board. Oh, and he's also looking for a new lab assistant. Kenny asks what happened to his last one, Tim, but Carlos just shrugs it off, saying the guy quit. Kenny then recommends one of his best students, David. Right at that moment, they see him coming out of class. Carlos goes after him and finds him in the middle of a confrontation. Some guy named Steve is giving him a hard time. Carlos steps in, breaks it up, and takes the opportunity to offer David the assistant position in his lab. He explains he's a herpetologist, basically, a reptile expert, especially snakes. David, who already knows of Carlos's reputation, says yes without hesitation. They arrive at Carlos's home, where his daughter Christina welcomes them. David is instantly smitten. Carlos introduces her as his new assistant. Christina asks about Tim, and Carlos awkwardly says he left to take care of a sick uncle, even though earlier he said it was his dad. Christina finds that a bit odd, but doesn't push it. Later, Carlos gives David a tour of the lab. It's full of snakes. David is blown away and eager to learn. Carlos then injects him with something. A monthly immunizer, he says, meant to slowly build resistance to venom. Once David starts working, Carlos introduces him to his rarest specimen, a king cobra, one of the most dangerous snakes on the planet. He mentions that strangely enough, the only animal the cobra fears is a small weasel. To prove it, he brings the weasel's cage closer, and sure enough, the cobra backs off. David is amazed. Later, Christina invites David to join them for dinner. He helps her clean up afterward, but starts feeling super sleepy. Carlos tells him it's just the immunizer kicking in. The fatigue hits hard, and they help him lie down. In bed, he feels like his body is burning from the inside, then passes out. The next morning, still asleep, David is being watched by Dr. Carlos and his pet snake, Harry. While talking to the snake, Carlos finally reveals his true intentions. He's experimenting on David in hopes of pushing humanity into the next stage of evolution. Meanwhile, a group of guests arrives to watch Dr. Carlos's famous Cobra show. David, now awake, joins the crowd. During the performance, a camera flash startles the cobra, and it almost strikes, but Carlos reacts just in time, calming it down and extracting venom like a pro. The audience applauds, but the donations? Just $18. That evening at dinner, Christina tells David that most people only show up hoping the cobra will one day bite her dad. David assumes he's safe because of the immunizer, but she explains it's never actually been tested against the king cobra's venom. Soon after, David notices the skin on his cheeks and around his eyes is starting to peel. Freaked out, he rushes to the doctor, who assures him it's a normal reaction to the immunizer and will go away. Relieved, David tries to carry on, even though he starts feeling cold. Carlos just blames the weather. That night, Sheriff Dennis, one of Carlos's former students, and his partner Morgan stop by. After a quick tour of the lab, Christina asks them to help move a sick python to an isolation area. Later, Christina heads back to the lab to make sure none of the snakes have escaped. While she's out, Sheriff Dennis takes the chance to question Dr. Carlos about Tim, who's officially missing. Carlos sticks to his story, that Tim left to care for a sick uncle, but Dennis tells him he spoke to Tim's aunt, and she hasn't seen him in weeks. On top of that, several students claim Tim was last seen with the doctor. Still, Carlos insists he doesn't know anything. Just then, the sick python starts to stir, and the officers, clearly uneasy, decide to leave and continue the investigation later. Later on, Carlos gives David another dose of the immunizer. David's body is gradually adjusting, but he starts noticing something strange, almost like he's forming a weird connection with the snakes. Even the king cobra stares at him from its cage in a way that feels unsettling. Christina shows him more of the lab's oddities, including a two-headed snake and some newborn hatchlings. As the days pass, David keeps living with them, getting more and more doses. One afternoon, after coming back from a venom sale, he spots a lake and asks Christina if she wants to go for a swim. She says yes, but asks him not to look since she's not wearing her glasses. They have a good time together. Meanwhile, Dr. Carlos records a private voice memo where he confesses that David's body is starting to change. His nose is reshaping, his body temperature is dropping, but he says the worst is yet to come. Oblivious to all this, David asks Christina out on a date to the town fair. While they're walking around, they run into Sheriff Dennis and Morgan again. Later, They notice a show called The Snake Man. Christina's hesitant, but David decides to check it out. Inside, he sees something wild, a half-human, half-reptile creature, its body covered in scales. Shocked, he runs out to find Christina, but they're interrupted by Steve, the same guy who always bullies David. This time, he's harassing Christina. David steps in, and a fight breaks out. At first, Steve has the upper hand, but then David starts acting off, snapping like a snake and even trying to bite him. The fight is broken up by the sheriff, who tells them to head home. Later that night, Steve, still obsessed with Christina, rides his motorcycle over to her house. He tries to sneak in through the window but is ambushed by Harry, the pet snake, who latches onto his arm. In a panic, Steve brutally beats the snake until it dies. Christina, devastated, rushes over, but it's too late. Steve storms off, calling them insane for keeping dangerous animals around. Dr. Carlos, cold and serious, promises that Steve will pay for what he's done. Once he finds out where Steve lives, Carlos begins to set his plan in motion. He packs a black mamba into a suitcase and heads to Steve's place. Carlos arrives at Steve's house just as Steve's girlfriend is leaving the door cracked open. He slips inside, finds Steve in the shower, opens the suitcase, and releases the black mamba. Within seconds, it strikes Steve on the foot. The venom kicks in fast. He can't breathe, suffers a heart attack, and dies on the spot. Carlos retrieves the snake and heads back home. When he gets there, he hears noises and starts to suspect that David and Christina were together. He talks to his daughter and warns her to stay away from David, that even a small injury could trigger a dangerous reaction because of the immunizer. Christina pushes back, convinced her father is hiding something, but Carlos only says it's for her own safety. Frustrated, she walks away. The next morning, David wakes up, looks in the mirror, and screams. His skin is turning greenish and scaly. Christina tries to go in and help him, but her father stops her, claiming it's just an allergic reaction and that he'll take care of it. He asks her to go pick up a new snake. Once she's gone, Carlos enters David's room, sees him fully transformed, and calmly reassures him that everything will be fine, then gives him another dose of the immunizer. Not long after, Professor Kenny shows up with bad news from the university board. They've denied the funding request and, even worse, they suspect Carlos might be connected to Tim's disappearance. He also tells him that Steve was found dead at home from cardiac arrest. Desperate, Carlos brushes it off, saying he has to keep working. Kenny, sensing something's off, decides to investigate on his own. He sneaks around to the lab and peers through a window. What he sees makes his blood run cold. David lifts his head, and his face is covered in reptilian scales. Horrified, Kenny barely has time to react before Carlos appears behind him and knocks him out cold. When he wakes up, Kenny finds himself chained inside the hideout. He tries to reason with Carlos, saying he knows everything about the experiment. But Carlos tells him it's pointless to call for help. No one's going to hear him out there. Then he forces him to make a grim choice. In front of him are two cages, one with a harmless snake, the other with a deadly one. Only one holds the key to his freedom. Carlos walks away. Kenny, being an expert in snakes, figures out which one is less dangerous, grabs the key, and manages to unlock the chains. But just as he's about to escape, a massive python comes out of nowhere, coils around him, and starts to squeeze. Kenny screams in agony, but the snake tightens until he goes limp. Meanwhile, Christina calls her father to say the snake he was waiting for hasn't arrived yet. It was all a trick. Carlos sent her away to keep her from seeing what he was doing to David. At the lab, David, now visibly deteriorating, struggles to reach the phone and call for help, but he can barely hold it, and Carlos cuts the line, telling whoever's on the other end that David is fine. While Christina gets ready to head back, a delivery guy casually mentions that there's a snake man with blue eyes at the carnival. Her gut twists. She rushes to the park, hides behind the crowd, and sees the so-called snake man with her own eyes. To her horror, it's Tim, her father's former assistant, mutated into a scaly, legless monster. Horrified, she bolts for home, terrified that David might be next. At the same time, Steve's girlfriend goes to the police to report her suspicions. She says Steve had gone to Christina's house the night before he died. On top of that, Kenny's wife calls in to report her husband missing after going to visit Dr. Carlos. Now seeing the pattern, Sheriff Dennis and Morgan decide it's time to take action. Back in the lab, David is almost fully transformed. Carlos has him tied down and gives him the final dose, completing his metamorphosis into a massive king cobra. The doctor celebrates, claiming success in merging human and serpent. He then releases another king cobra to try and fuse them together, but things go south fast. The snake lunges at him and bites him multiple times. Just as Christina feared, the immunizer doesn't protect him from this venom. Carlos collapses and dies on the spot. Christina arrives moments later and finds her father's lifeless body with the cobra still loose. It goes to strike her, but she dodges. Just then, the sheriff and Morgan burst in. Dennis fires and kills the snake. Christina rushes to the lab and finds David, now fully changed. At that moment, a weasel escapes from its cage and attacks the cobra. Christina calls out David's name as the police aim their weapons at him. Whether David survives or not remains a mystery.